What happens when one of Hollywood's most beloved stars walks onto daytime television expecting warmth, and instead finds himself cornered, provoked, and pushed to the edge? When Brad Pitt appeared on The View show, it was supposed to be a charming, light-hearted interview about his latest film. But within minutes, the mood in the studio shifted. What began as laughter turned into silence, and what followed would leave millions of viewers stunned, replaying the moment again and again. Before we dive in, make sure you subscribe to Stage View, your front row seat to Hollywood's most shocking confrontations and unforgettable on-air moments. Hit like, drop your thoughts in the comments, and stay until the end, because what Brad said before walking off left even Joy Behar speechless. The lights were warm, the audience electric, and the stage buzzed with chatter as Brad took his seat beside Joy Behar, Whoopi Goldberg, and the other co-hosts. The crowd applauded wildly, phones raised, eyes gleaming. Brad smiled, that familiar movie star ease, giving a small wave to the audience. You could almost feel the charm radiating from him. Relaxed, confident, his tone playful as he greeted them. "Good to be here," he said, voice smooth, leaning forward slightly. Joy Behar grinned, already poised for her first line. That signature mix of humor and bite she was famous for. "Well, look who finally decided to show up on The View. We were starting to think you only do serious interviews now, Mr. Oscar winner." Laughter rippled through the crowd. Brad smiled again, brushing it off. "Hey, I go where I'm invited," he joked. "And you all are tougher than most reporters I deal with." But there was something in Joy's eyes, a spark, a kind of testing energy. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her legs, tone sharpening ever so slightly. "We're glad you're here, Brad. It's been a while since we've seen you on daytime TV. You've been keeping quiet lately, or maybe just keeping safe." The audience chuckled uncertainly. Brad's smile faltered for a split second, barely visible. He tilted his head. "Safe," he repeated. Joy smirked. "You know, avoiding controversy, avoiding tough questions, that kind of safe. Hollywood's golden boy who never wants to get messy." The crowd gave a few uneasy laughs. Whoopi's eyebrow arched slightly, as if sensing the temperature in the room rising. Brad sat up straighter. "I think I've had my share of messy," he said, his voice still calm but quieter, heavier. That line landed like a pin dropping in a room full of people holding their breath. Everyone knew what he meant: the divorce, the custody battles, the endless headlines. Joy's grin didn't fade. In fact, she seemed to press further. "Well, since you brought it up," she said, turning toward him. "A lot of people are still wondering, do you feel like the media was unfair to you, or do you think you earned some of that scrutiny?" The audience murmured. The other co-hosts exchanged quick looks. Brad exhaled softly, nodding. "That's fair," he began steady. "I made mistakes. I've said that. But life's about growth. I don't live in those old stories anymore." It was a sincere, composed answer, the kind that might have steered the conversation back to his film. But Joy wasn't done. "That's nice," she said lightly. "But the thing is, Brad, people don't forget easily. You can say you've moved on, but a lot of women out there, they remember the way you handled things with Angelina. Some would say—" Whoopi interrupted gently, "Joy." But Joy kept going. "Some would say you got off easy because you're Brad Pitt. Good looks, charm, the whole package. You think any other man in Hollywood would have survived that without being canceled?" Gasps. A few nervous laughs. The studio energy cracked like static. Brad's face hardened just slightly. He leaned back in his chair, lips pressed together, eyes steady on Joy. For the first time, the warmth in his voice disappeared. "I think people see what they want to see," he said quietly. "And maybe what they're told to see." Joy smiled, sensing the shift. "Oh, come on, Brad. That sounds like a conspiracy theory. We're just talking truth here." But his expression didn't change. His tone dropped lower. "There's a difference between truth and entertainment dressed up as truth." The silence that followed was thick. Even the camera operators seemed to hesitate. Whoopi tried to steer things back. "All right, let's talk about the movie." But Joy wasn't ready to let go. "No, I'm curious," she said, still smiling but now visibly uncomfortable with his direct gaze. "You think shows like ours twist the truth?" Brad's jaw tensed. The camera zoomed closer, his face unreadable, a calm intensity behind the eyes. "I think people forget that behind every headline is a human being who's already lived that pain. So yeah," he said, "sometimes it's twisted." The audience went dead silent. No laughter, no whispers, just the hum of the studio lights. Joy blinked, her usual quick wit faltering for the first time. She tried to recover. "Well, we're not TMZ here, Brad. We just ask what the audience wants to know. He nodded slowly. Maybe the audience wants to feel something real. Not watch people get torn apart for sport. Whoopi glanced at the producers off camera. This wasn't how the segment was supposed to go. The tension was real now, visible in the nervous glances, the fidgeting audience, the sudden stiffness between the hosts. Joy shifted in her seat. All right, well, she began. But Brad spoke again, voice calm but sharp enough to slice through the air. You know, Joy, I've done a lot of interviews in my life. But it's rare that someone hides judgment behind a smile so well. The gasp from the crowd was instant. Joy's mouth fell open, eyes wide, a flash of disbelief, maybe even hurt. Whoopi leaned forward, hand half raised. Okay, let's take a break. But Brad wasn't finished. He looked toward the audience, the same audience that had cheered for him moments ago, and said, This is why people stop coming on shows like this. You want drama, not honesty. The words echoed through the studio, the silence louder than any applause could have been. Cameras zoomed out. The music cue was missed. The teleprompter froze. Even the hosts looked unsure of what to do. Joy finally forced a laugh, brittle, nervous. Wow, Brad Pitt calling me dramatic. Now I've heard everything. He gave a small, almost sad smile. No, he said softly. You've just heard the truth. And with that, he looked away, as the show abruptly cut to commercial. The screen faded to black. The tension, however, didn't. Because when the cameras came back on, nothing was the same. When the view returned from that commercial break, the air in the studio had changed. It wasn't just tense, it was fragile. The applause sign flickered, urging the audience to cheer, but the claps were hesitant, uneven. Everyone was still processing what had just happened. Brad Pitt sat back in his chair, hands clasped together, eyes down. He wasn't angry, not exactly. It was something deeper, a mix of disappointment and exhaustion, like someone who'd walked into a familiar trap one too many times. Joy Behar tried to reset the tone. She plastered on that practiced TV smile, the one that said everything's fine. We're back with Brad Pitt, she said lightly, her voice slightly strained, talking about his new film, Redemption Road. The title itself felt ironic now. Brad looked up, giving a polite nod. Yeah, he said simply. Whoopi jumped in quickly, trying to shift gears. Brad, this movie, it's about second chances, right? About confronting your past. Brad smiled faintly. Exactly. It's about forgiveness. Not just from others, but from yourself. He spoke softly, measured, but his words carried a quiet weight. The audience seemed to lean in, sensing something raw behind his tone. Joy, however, wasn't ready to stay silent. She glanced down at her cue cards, then back up. Forgiveness is a big theme, she said. But do you think everyone deserves it? Even people who've, let's say, caused public pain. Whoopi's head turned sharply toward her. Brad's expression froze again, that same flicker of disbelief from earlier. He didn't speak right away. You could see him choosing his next words carefully. I think, he began slowly, that holding on to resentment only keeps the pain alive. For everyone. Joy leaned forward. So you're saying the public should forgive you? The words hung in the air like smoke. A few gasps from the crowd. One audience member muttered, wow, under her breath. Brad looked directly at her this time. Not at Joy, but through her, in that way people do when they've stopped performing. No, he said. I'm saying forgiveness isn't something you demand. It's something you earn. And it's something private. Joy tried to chuckle it off, but her laugh fell flat. Private's hard when you're a global superstar, she quipped. Comes with the job, doesn't it? Brad tilted his head, the faintest smirk tugging at his lips. Maybe. But that doesn't give anyone the right to play judge and jury for entertainment. The tension was palpable. The audience didn't know whether to laugh or applaud. Sunny Hostin, sitting between them, finally spoke up, carefully, diplomatically. I think what Brad's saying, she said, is that sometimes we forget these are human lives we're talking about. We consume celebrity stories like fiction. Brad nodded in quiet agreement. Joy crossed her arms, clearly feeling cornered. I get that, she said. But this is the view, Brad. We ask tough questions. That's what people expect. Brad looked around the set, the bright lights, the cameras, the sea of faces waiting for a reaction. Then he smiled, but it wasn't amusement. It was sadness. Maybe that's the problem, he said softly. Maybe people stopped expecting empathy. For a long second, no one spoke. Whoopi finally broke the silence, leaning toward Joy. Joy, maybe we can. But Joy cut in, almost defensively now. No, I just think we're doing our jobs. We're not villains here. Brad turned toward her. No one said you were. But sometimes the line between curiosity and cruelty gets blurred. And I think we all need to know when we've crossed it. His words hit hard. Even the audience, now utterly still, seemed aware that something profound had been said. Joy's expression tightened. She shifted her tone, more brittle now. So are you saying I crossed it? A dangerous question. One that could go nowhere good. Brad hesitated. He looked at her, then down at his hands, then back up, eyes calm but unflinching. I think, he said, you already know the answer. The silence that followed was suffocating. Even the audience members in the back stopped breathing for a moment. Whoopi sighed, rubbing her temples. All right, she said finally, trying to force a smile. Let's lighten things up. Brad, I heard your kids visited the set. But it was too late. The energy couldn't be recovered. The audience sensed the fracture, the subtle hostility simmering beneath the surface. Brad smiled politely and played along, answering questions about filming, the cast, and his co-stars. But something had changed. His voice was quieter, his laughter forced. And Joy, despite her attempts to laugh, couldn't quite look him in the eye anymore. As the segment wrapped, the producer's voice echoed through the earpieces. 30 seconds to close. Whoopi thanked Brad for coming. Always a pleasure having you, she said, sincerity in her voice. Thanks, Brad said, his smile returning faintly. It's been interesting. The crowd laughed nervously. The theme music swelled. As soon as the cameras cut, the illusion broke. The hosts leaned back, the tension flooding out in awkward silence. Crew members moved quickly across the stage, resetting cameras, clearing mugs. The audience whispered in low tones, fragments of disbelief. Did that just happen? He was so calm, but she pushed him. Joy looked shaken. Brad stood up, shook hands with Whoopi and Sunny, thanked them quietly, then turned toward Joy. For a heartbeat, it looked like he might just walk away. But instead, he stopped, leaned slightly toward her, and said something off mic. The studio cameras didn't catch it, but one of the nearby audience members, close enough to hear, later described it as soft, but firm, like a man putting an end to something. Whatever he said made Joy's expression change. The color drained from her face. She nodded once, said nothing. He straightened his jacket, smiled faintly to the audience, and walked off stage. And though the cameras were off, the drama was far from over. Because in the minutes that followed, in the hallways behind the set, voices were raised, producers scrambled, and one conversation between Joy and the show's executive producer would set social media on fire within hours. The cameras stopped rolling, but the tension didn't. The bright studio lights dimmed to half power as crew members began clearing the set, but the silence that followed Brad Pitt's quiet exit was deafening. Joy Behar sat back in her chair, staring at the table in front of her. The cue cards she'd been holding were bent and creased, her hands still trembling slightly. The other co-hosts didn't say a word. Even Whoopi, usually quick with humor to diffuse any awkwardness, just sighed deeply and looked toward the floor. The audience was ushered out faster than usual. No selfies, no extra chatter, just confused whispers trailing through the aisles. Everyone knew they'd witnessed something that wasn't scripted. Something that wasn't supposed to happen. Behind the set, Brad Pitt walked steadily down the narrow hallway toward the green room. His publicist, a tall woman in a black blazer, followed close behind. "Brad, are you okay?" she asked quietly. He didn't answer right away. His jaw was tight, eyes focused straight ahead. "I'm fine," he said finally. "Just done. Do you want to skip the press line?" she asked carefully. He stopped walking and looked at her. "Yeah, I think we've said enough today." Inside the green room, the hum of conversation was low, uncertain. Assistants avoided eye contact, producers whispered into headsets, and a few crew members pretended to be busy adjusting lights that didn't need adjusting. A minute later, Joy Behar entered, flanked by one of the producers. The room went quiet. Brad was standing near the couch, still holding a bottle of water he hadn't opened. When he saw her, he didn't move. "Brad," Joy started, voice lower than before. "Can we talk for a second?" The producer tried to step in, but Joy raised a hand. "It's fine," she said. Brad nodded slightly, gesturing toward the corner of the room where they could speak privately. The air felt heavier there, like even the walls were listening. "I didn't mean for that to get heated," Joy began. "You know how this show is. We push, we challenge, that's what people expect." Brad studied her for a moment before answering. His voice was calm, but there was an edge beneath it, not anger, just truth. "There's a difference between pushing," he said, "and provoking." Joy blinked, caught off guard by his steady tone. I wasn't provoking. I was asking what the audience wanted to know. Brad tilted his head slightly. No, he said. You were asking what you wanted to ask, because you knew it would make good TV. Joy crossed her arms, defensive now. That's not fair. We ask everyone tough questions. You're not special. Brad smiled faintly, but it didn't reach his eyes. I never said I was. But you went after me like you had something to prove. The silence stretched. The producer nearby shifted uncomfortably. Joy sighed, her tone softening slightly. Look, Brad, if I crossed a line, that wasn't my intention. I respect you. Really. It just got tense. He looked at her for a long moment before speaking again. It's not about me, he said. It's about what we've turned this into, what interviews have become. You don't listen anymore, Joy. You dig. You poke. You try to make people crack. Her eyes flickered, unsure whether to argue or stay silent. He continued, voice low but steady. I've been through hell, and I own that. But when you turn someone's lowest moments into a game, that says more about you than it does about them. Joy didn't respond. For once, the woman known for her comebacks had none. Brad nodded once, then placed the untouched water bottle on the table. Good luck with your show, he said quietly. I think you'll need it. He turned and walked out of the room. The door clicked shut behind him, leaving Joy standing there, motionless, her reflection caught in the dark TV screen. The producer exhaled sharply, breaking the silence. We'll need to do some damage control, he muttered, pulling out his phone. Clips are already being clipped. Joy turned toward him. Clipped? Yeah, he said, scrolling quickly. Somebody in the audience filmed part of the argument before commercial. It's already online. Joy's stomach dropped. You're kidding. But he wasn't. Within minutes, the first video hit Twitter. A shaky recording, maybe 15 seconds long, showing Brad Pitt leaning forward, eyes cold, voice quiet but sharp. This is why people stop coming on shows like this. The clip spread like wildfire. By the time Joy got back to her dressing room, her phone was already vibrating nonstop. Mentions, retweets, hashtags, hashtag Brad vs. Joy, hashtag ViewMeltdown, hashtag Pitt Speaks Truth. Producers scrambled to craft a statement, something to downplay the confrontation, maybe spin it as a passionate exchange about fame and accountability. But it was too late. The internet had already decided what happened. On social media, fans took sides. Some praised Brad for standing up for himself. Finally, someone said it. These shows act like courtrooms. Brad stayed calm and classy. She went too far. Others defended Joy. It's her job to ask tough questions. Celebs always play the victim when they don't like being confronted. Meanwhile, entertainment sites pounced. Headlines spread across every major outlet. Brad Pitt clashes with Joy Behar live on The View. Tense moment forces commercial break during Brad Pitt interview. Inside Brad Pitt's explosive exchange that left the studio silent. By late afternoon, the clip had been viewed over 12 million times. Brad's team released a short, composed statement. Brad appreciated the opportunity to appear on The View. While discussions can get intense, he stands by the importance of honest and respectful dialogue. Short, simple, but it said everything. Joy, however, stayed quiet. No tweets. No public comments. Even the next morning's episode of The View opened without her usual energy. She joked lightly about tough interviews, but the tension was obvious. Whoopi tried to steer the show forward, but when the crowd laughed awkwardly at a joke that didn't land, it was clear. The audience hadn't moved on. Behind the scenes, executives were furious. One insider was overheard saying, "We can't afford another PR nightmare this month." But for viewers, it was too late. The damage was done. The conversation had already shifted from a talk show moment to a cultural moment, about celebrity accountability, media cruelty, and where the line between honesty and exploitation really lies. And in the middle of that storm stood two people, one calm, one shaken, both wondering how something meant to promote a film had turned into one of the most viral confrontations of the year. But what no one knew yet, what hadn't leaked, was what Brad actually whispered to Joy right before walking off. Because that sentence, quietly spoken and caught only by one witness, would change everything. By the next morning, The View wasn't just trending, it was dominating every news cycle. Every entertainment outlet, podcast, and gossip blog had the same headline written in different fonts. Brad Pitt's confrontation with Joy Behar goes viral. Clips were everywhere, slowed down, captioned, analyzed from every possible angle. YouTubers were breaking down the moment frame by frame, body language experts dissecting microexpressions, lip readers zooming in on Brad's face as he leaned toward Joy right before leaving. And then someone claimed to have caught it. At first, it was just speculation. A few accounts claiming they'd heard Brad's last words before he walked away. Then, one fan who had been sitting near the front of the audience posted a short audio clip recorded from their phone, just before the feed cut to commercial. The sound was muffled, but the words were clear enough to make headlines within minutes. "Be careful what story you tell, Joy, because someday it might be about you." That was it. Quiet, calm, but with an unmistakable chill underneath. The internet exploded. Some called it a warning. Others said it was poetic justice, a movie star finally turning the script on the interviewer. Within hours, the quote became a viral meme. Photos of Joy Behar's stunned face paired with Brad's whispered words flooded social media. The phrase even started trending on X. Hashtag be careful what story you tell. Morning shows replayed the footage on loop. CNN hosted a panel discussion titled, "When Interviews Go Too Far." Even Saturday Night Live writers were reportedly rewriting their weekend cold open to parody the moment. But while the world laughed and debated, Joy Behar wasn't laughing. Backstage at The View the following day, producers were in damage control mode. Emails flew between PR teams, trying to find a way to spin the narrative back in the show's favor. "We'll say it was a misunderstanding," one suggested. "We'll claim it was taken out of context," another argued. Joy sat in her dressing room, phone face down, staring at her reflection in the mirror. Her eyes were tired, the usual spark replaced with something quieter, a weight she hadn't expected. She wasn't used to being the villain in the story. Then came the knock on the door. Whoopi stepped in, coffee in hand. "You holding up?" she asked gently. Joy sighed, rubbing her temples. "Barely. They're calling me a bully, Whoopi. I can't even open my phone without seeing my face in some damn meme." Whoopi nodded slowly. "You went too hard on him, Joy. You know that." Joy frowned. "I was doing my job." "Maybe," Whoopi said. "But sometimes our jobs come with mirrors." Joy looked up at her, the words sinking in deeper than she expected. "So what? I just let him say whatever he wants, no pushback." "Pushback's fine," Whoopi said softly. "Pushing until someone breaks? That's something else." The silence between them lingered. Meanwhile, across town, Brad Pitt's team was meeting in a hotel suite overlooking Manhattan. His phone buzzed constantly, texts from fellow actors, directors, friends. Most of them said the same thing. "You handled that like a pro." Brad sat quietly, reading through the messages. Finally, his publicist spoke. "We can make a statement, clarify what you meant. Or we can let it fade." He looked out the window, the city sprawling endlessly below. "No," he said. "Let people talk. Maybe they'll start thinking about what they're saying too." Later that evening, he posted a short message on his official Instagram. Just white text on a black background. There's always a line between asking questions and drawing blood. Know the difference. No hashtags. No mention of Joy. No context. It went viral within an hour. Celebrities shared it. Fans turned it into art, quotes, reels. It became the calm, dignified punctuation to a storm that had consumed the media for 2 days straight. By the third morning, The View opened with a noticeably somber tone. Joy Behar looked directly into the camera, her expression measured. "I want to take a moment to address something," she began. "Yesterday's interview with Brad Pitt was intense. Emotions ran high, and I may have gone further than I should have. It was never my intention to make anyone feel attacked. I respect Brad, and I wish him nothing but the best." Applause, soft, uncertain, filled the studio. Whoopi nodded beside her, gently adding, "We all have passionate moments, and that's what makes this show real. But we also learn, we reflect, and we move forward." Brad never publicly responded to Joy's apology. He didn't have to. His silence said more than words ever could. But behind the curtain of celebrity gossip and viral headlines, something deeper had shifted. People online began to question not just Joy, not just The View, but the entire culture of confrontation. The way entertainment had blurred with humiliation, the way tough interviews often turned into public trials. Clips from the show were replayed, not as gossip, but as case studies in empathy and ego. Viewers began discussing it in comment sections, podcasts, reaction videos. The story had outgrown its spark. It had become a reflection. Because at its core, it wasn't just about Brad Pitt or Joy Behar anymore. It was about all of us. The audiences who cheer when a celebrity is cornered, who scroll through scandals like they're episodes of a series, forgetting that behind every soundbite is a human being trying to keep their dignity intact. Weeks later, when Brad's film Redemption Road premiered, journalists noted how poised, composed, and peaceful he seemed on the red carpet. Reporters tried to ask about the view, but he just smiled. "It's all part of the story," he said simply. "And every story has its lesson." The clip of that red carpet moment went viral too, but this time for a different reason. Viewers commented on his grace, his calmness, his refusal to feed the spectacle. Joy Behar, meanwhile, took a short hiatus from the view soon after. When she returned, she was notably softer, her tone less combative, her humor more grounded. For a while, the world moved on. The story faded. But every once in a while, someone would repost that old clip, and the line would echo again. "Be careful what story you tell, because someday it might be about you." And even now, years later, people still debate who was right, who was wrong, and whether that on-air clash changed how we see interviews forever. Because sometimes one conversation, one moment of truth, can shift an entire culture. And that's what happened on The View. If you've been with us through this story, what do you think? Was Brad right to call it out, or did Joy just do her job? Tell us your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget, subscribe to Stage View for more dramatic, emotional, and powerful Hollywood moments brought to life like you were right there in the room. Hit that like button, share this story with your friends, and join us next time, because in Hollywood, every smile hides a story, and every story has a spark.